What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. So I'm going to go over a bunch of players that have either been rising or falling pretty significantly in my rankings over the last couple of weeks. These are guys that even some of them I wasn't necessarily all that high on, and maybe I've actually come around on. Maybe I like them quite a bit. Or other guys I was actually pretty high on coming into the draft or coming into the season, and I'm sort of, softening up on them a little bit. Not as excited about these guys. So it's just, we get all this new information throughout the course of the preseason, off season, and it's important to make sure that you stay fluid, don't get take lock, and just sort of stick to whatever takes you had in April, May, June, just because you had them early on. It's important to understand when new information comes in and see when it's going to be relevant and understand how we can really adapt to the information that's coming in. So hope you guys find this video useful. If there's any players that you guys think I should have included on here that I didn't, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to discuss anything with you guys in the comments. And yeah, just been a lot of fun doing all this stuff. So yeah, with that, let's just get into the first player here. So the first player that's been rising in my rankings quite a bit lately is actually Jamal Williams. He was in line to be splitting snaps with Kendre Miller over the first 3 weeks of the season while Alvin Kamara was suspended, but Kendre Miller was injured again, straining his hamstring on August 31st, and this has been just a string of injuries for Kendre Miller. He's a guy that at this point I don't think is going to factor into the Saints equation very early on in the season, and for a rookie that means he's probably going to miss his opportunity to really get a real foothold in this backfield once Alvin Kamara comes back. So that makes Jamal Williams effectively the only running back in New Orleans for the first 3 weeks of the season. That's going to make him a high-end running back too, honestly. The Saints offense is going to be really good for the first over the course of the season, in my opinion. On top of that, we know that Jamal Williams is a talented player. He's obviously a great goal line back. He's going to have those opportunities on this team, and he's a decent pass catcher as well, especially if you look back to his time in Green Bay. He caught a lot of passes from Aaron Rodgers back there. So I think over the first month of the season, you're looking at Jamal Williams being a top 24 running back play, maybe top 20. And even when Alvin Kamara comes back, I think he's going to be involved. He'll be probably just like a 40% snap kind of guy, a guy that's going to get goal line work and could easily be played in the flex spot if you need him. So Jamal Williams is one of my favorite like 9th, 10th round draft picks right now, and he's a guy that I'm really comfortable and really like targeting if I go RB0. He's a guy that I'd be happy with starting the season with. Another player that's been rising in my rankings lately, and honestly for a very similar reason to with Jamal Williams, is going to be Raheem Mostert. With the injury to Jeff Wilson Jr. Going on IR for at least the first 4 weeks of the season, Raheem Mostert's effectively the only healthy running back in Miami at this point. I know they've got Salvin Ahmed and Devon Achane, who I like quite a bit, but Raheem Mostert is the starting running back in Miami very clearly. He's probably going to be given 15 to 20 touches in what should be a top 10 offense, and we know Raheem Mostert's talented. He's averaged over 5 yards per carry throughout the course of his career, and the main issue for him has just been health. So obviously, I wouldn't expect Raheem Mostert to be a guy that's going to be able to withstand a huge workload for the whole course of the season. But as long as he's given that workload, he's going to be a high end RB2 for you guys. They open the season against the Chargers, who really haven't been able to defend the run over the last several years. Raheem Mostert's going to be a really smash player for you guys for the first month of the season, and even if Jeff Wilson comes back, I think he's still usable. On top of that, I don't think Devon Achane could really take over a full workload just because of how big he is. I think Achane could really factor in on third downs and all that. But unless the Dolphins add another running back to this room, I think Mostert's in line to be the starter and get 15 touches a week and a good offense. So I think he's the perfect target for you guys who go RB0, really similar to Jamal Williams. You could honestly go Jamal Williams and Raheem Mostert back-to-back in your drafts, like round 9 and 10, 10 and 11, and you could start those guys both for the first month of your season, really figure out your running back room after that. So if you go RB0, I like both those guys as really great targets, and I think they're both really usable throughout the whole course of the season, even though they're going to obviously spike their production in the first month. So another guy who's been rising in my rankings due to injury is somebody that I've talked about quite a bit throughout the course of the offseason and someone that I like, and that's going to be Marvin Mims. Mims is in line to start as the wide receiver 2 for the Denver Broncos for the first couple weeks of the season while Jerry Jeudy rests his hamstring, and he's honestly an extremely talented player. I fully expect him to thrive and just dominate early on. He already had a really deep pass caught in the final week of the preseason. He's flashed already throughout the course of the offseason, and he's going to be given manufactured touches in this offense because of how explosive he is. They're going to utilize him in the screen game. They'll give him some end arounds. He's probably going to get 10 total targets plus touches plus carries a week, and that's going to be really good for a rookie player that's coming into the season given that much of a workload. On top of that, because of how explosive he is down the field, how easily he can take the top off of the defense, that gives him a really high weekly ceiling. He's a really great best ball target, and if you're doing deeper leagues and you want to start him in your flex spot, I think you could do that early on, but there's also a chance that Marvin Mims just sort of takes hold of this number 1 wide receiver role in this offense. I don't think it's by any means settled that Jerry Jeudy is the best receiver in the offense. Jeudy is probably the wide receiver 1 here, Sutton's probably the wide receiver 2, and Mims is probably the 3 when they're all healthy, but Mims is a bit of an unknown. He's a second-round player. He's a really talented player, a guy that I think has enough talent to really win out that starting job there. So I really like taking rookies like that are given opportunities early on in the season, and I think there's a real world that exists where Marvin Mims just sort of becomes Denver's version of Tyler Lockett for Russell Wilson. Obviously, that's like the upside case here, but it's definitely there for Marvin Mims, and where he's being drafted, he's someone that I love targeting right now. Next up, we've got the first tight end on my list that's been rising in my rankings quite a bit, and that's Juwan Johnson, who'll be the second and final Saint on this list. The Saints have been vocal all offseason about how great Johnson looks in training camp, and Derek Carr historically targets his tight ends at a really high pace. We've seen Jared Cook and Darren Waller both post the best seasons of their career with Derek Carr as their quarterback, and Juwan Johnson has shown the ability to score touchdowns already. He had like 7 or 8 receiving touchdowns last season in what was a brutal offense, and if he earns a higher target share, I think you could be looking at something like 15 to 20% for Juwan Johnson this season. He could be this year's breakout tight end. I know he's extremely talented. He played wide receiver in college. He's going to be a pass catching specialist for this team, and I think there's a real world that exists where he ends up being like the number 2 target in the offense behind Chris Olave. And if that's the case, Juwan Johnson's absolutely going to smash his ADP. He's one of my favorite late round targets at the tight end position, and I would be more than comfortable leaving my draft with him as my tight end 1 to start the year. Another tight end who's been rising in my rankings quite a bit lately is Tyler Higbee. With the injury to Cooper Kupp, somebody in Los Angeles is going to need to be catching passes from Matthew Stafford this season, and it really looks like it's going to be Tyler Higbee. Tyler Higbee's been a target hog in this offense over the last couple seasons, and he's honestly decent at that. He's going to be a guy that can utilize pretty close to the line of scrimmage, so I really only prefer him in PPR formats, but he's flashed before. He's had a couple spike weeks, a couple spike seasons as a Ram tight end, and he's a decent little player. He's a guy that honestly could be the number 1 target getter in this offense while Cooper Kupp is out, and I don't think that that's something that we should scoff at. In PPR formats, I think he can absolutely be useful. I would fully expect him to be a top 10 tight end while Cooper Kupp is out, and that's useful, especially early on in the season when there's so much unknown surrounding why the tight ends are going to pan out. If you wait on your tight end position, I think it's a good idea to go with a guy like Tyler Higbee and then a more high upside guy. So a Tyler Higbee with a Juwan Johnson or a Dalton Kincaid or a Sam Laporta or a Greg Dulcich or a Chigakonkwo, someone like that with that upside, while you can play Tyler Higbee while you wait and see what happens there. So Higbee's raised up my rankings just a little bit. I think he's going to be more useful than I was initially projecting, and I do think he's a guy that I'd be targeting late in drafts, so you got to go 2 tight ends. Another guy who's been rising in my rankings quite a bit lately is George Pickens. George Pickens is extremely talented, obviously, but my main concern with him was just going to be the Steelers' offense, and we've seen this preseason the Steelers' offense really looks like they're going to take a step forward. They've scored a touchdown on all 5 of the drives headlined by Kenny Pickett this offseason, and that's going to be really great for George Pickens, who does really profile to be the main touchdown target share of this offense at the wide receiver position. He's going to be a guy that has a legitimate outside shot at double-digit touchdowns if Kenny Pickett can take that huge step forward. On top of that, over the course of at least his rookie season, George Pickens really didn't flash his ability to do much with the ball in his hands after the catch. He's basically been a contested catch kind of guy, and then that was about all you were going to get out of him. But this is his second year coming off of a torn ACL that he suffered in college. That is generally when we see players in the NFL really return to their full health, be their most explosive selves. So we have seen George Pickens make a couple nice plays in open space so far this preseason. I think we could see him be more useful in terms of the yards after the catch department, and that's really going to just help raise his floor as well. We're not going to have to depend on those really inconsistent contested catches, and that's going to make him a more reliable fantasy option. I think there's a world that exists here where he sees a 20% target share, has like a 30% touchdown share in this offense, and that's going to give him like a really high floor this season, and I think he's got a legitimate shot to be like a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, and I'd be more than comfortable drafting him to be on wide receiver 3 for my lineups. And obviously, I think he would get a boost in non-PPR and half PPR formats because Deontay's obviously going to be the guy that's going to dominate target share in this offense, so in non-PPR, half PPR, he gets a slight boost, but even in PPR, I'm comfortable with him in 3 wide receivers now. Another player rising in my rankings lately is Brian Robinson. I'm actually very high on both Commanders running backs at this point, although I've talked a lot about Antonio Gibson this entire offseason, so I thought I'd give Brian Robinson some love. He looked really good throughout the course of the preseason, and he was actually being utilized in the passing game quite a bit. That's something that I wasn't really expecting. He is still coming off the field on 3rd and longs in the 2-minute drill, but that's obviously going to be Antonio Gibson's role, but this Commanders team could utilize the running backs as a pass-catching core a lot more than I was initially anticipating. He's been getting pretty rave reviews out of training camp as well in terms of just how good he looks, how much better he looks as a pass catcher than what he was last season, and that's going to make him really valuable, especially if he can catch like 3 or 4 passes a week. That's maybe a little too high. 2 to 3 is probably possible, though, and he might see 15 to 20 touches a week in what should be a decent offense. This is a Commanders offense that I do expect to take a step forward. Sam Howell looked really great all offseason. Eric Bieniemy's shown already that he can run a really capable offense in the NFL, and I think there's just a lot to be excited about in Washington right now. And on top of that, being a guy that's going to be given this much workload. He doesn't even necessarily need to be efficient. He really wasn't last season, but we have to remember that he got shot in the leg twice right before the NFL season started. We could see Brian Robinson play just much better than what he did last season. If he's any more efficient with the touches that he's given than he was last year, he could be a lot more than just a touchdown-dependent running back too. I think he could be a very consistent low-end running back too for you guys this season, and he's getting drafted as like the RB 33 right now. He's a guy that I'm pretty comfortable with as my running back too. If he's your running back 3, I'm really happy about that. He gives you a nice safe floor, and anytime you can get a player with guaranteed touches and a decent offense is someone that we should be targeting. So I'm pretty excited about Brian Robinson. I do still prefer Antonio Gibson in PPR formats, but in half PPR, I think Brian Robinson would get the nod, and obviously in non-PPR he would as well. So I like both of them quite a bit, but Brian Robinson's a guy that I was sort of writing off, and I really shouldn't have been. He's going to be really useful for you guys this season. Another player who's been rising in my rankings quite a bit lately is Anthony Richardson. I really wasn't all that high on him coming into the offseason. He was a guy that I thought was just way too raw as a passer to really develop into a quality fantasy asset early on in his career. And honestly, I thought Gardner Minshew would start the season for the Colts, but it seems more and more apparent that Anthony Richardson not only is going to get the start for them, but he's going to be utilized as a rusher a ton in this offense. It's just very clear to me that Anthony Richardson is going to have over 1,000 rushing yards as a rookie. That's going to make him fantasy viable, whether or not he can throw the ball well at all. It's going to be hard for him to be a top 10 quarterback or for him to not be a top 10 quarterback if he has that kind of rushing volume, especially in 4-point per passing touchdown formats. I do expect him to have several rushing touchdowns this season, especially with Jonathan Taylor gone. Anthony Richardson is their go-to option at the goal line. He's going to be a guy that should be utilized in the running game a ton. I don't expect him to throw for even 200 yards a game this season. I think a 3,000 passing yard season would be honestly very optimistic for Richardson, but if he rushes for 1,000 yards, adds 8 or 9 rushing touchdowns, I think it's going to make him plenty fantasy viable. I would be more than comfortable drafting him as your second quarterback. I would take a guy like Kirk Cousins, Geno Smith, and then pair him with Anthony Richardson. Start the higher floor guy for the start of the season, and then wait and see what happens with Richardson, because Richardson really could be a league-winning asset down the stretch, and he's going to be a really exciting player. I'm really excited to watch him play and develop as a player, but I think he's going to be really useful in fantasy towards the back half of the season, and if you have to wait on the quarterback position, he's definitely someone that I'd be targeting now. And one more player who's been rising in my rankings lately that I really didn't think I'd ever be talking about that in a positive light this season is Adam Thielen. I really wouldn't expect much out of Thielen this season, but I am becoming kind of cautiously optimistic that he could be a useful flex player in 3 wide receiver formats. He's got a 35% target share over the course of the preseason in terms of snaps played by Bryce Young. And honestly, I think that he could see, obviously a 35% target share is too high, but I think you could be looking at a target share in the high 20s early on in the season. He's got he's got the most guaranteed money of any wide receiver on this roster. He was given a 3-year, $25 million contract with $14 million guaranteed in that. On top of that, Terrace Marshall and DJ Chark are already banged up, so this wide receiver room is basically Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo. Mingo's a rookie. I wouldn't expect him to come out of the gates hot this season. I'd expect Adam Thielen to very clearly lead this offense in targets, and that's going to mean he can pretty much volume his way to being relevant in PPR formats. He's always shown an ability to be a useful red zone target as well. So even though he's 32 at this point, probably nowhere near what he used to be as a player, I still think he's going to be involved in this offense. And if the offense could do anything at all, Adam Thielen's going to be pretty useful. So I've moved him up in my rankings. I think he's like a low end wide receiver 3, high end wide receiver 4 for you guys, maybe a little bit lower than that. But if you draft him and need to play him in deeper leagues, I think he's going to be pretty useful early on in the season especially, and I think he's going to be totally okay this season. So I'm not completely avoiding him anymore. I don't think the upside's really there. So if you want to take a higher upside player, take a Jonathan Mingo even, who's got the upside to develop into something special, then obviously do that. But if you want a safe play, I think Adam Thielen really could be that for you guys this season. So my first faller here is going to be Cam Akers. More and more reports are coming out of the Rams passing training camp that Kyren Williams is going to be the pass catching back in LA, and that's just going to be something that really limits the upside for Cam Akers. Obviously, Cam Akers is a guy who wasn't really ever going to see a ton of rushing volume in this offense. I don't think this is going to be a very run-heavy team. They're going to try and air it out, use Matthew Stafford, and that's really the best part of this team. They really do want to try and do that, and they're also going to be giving up a lot of points this season. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for this team to be playing catch-up, and if that's the scenario, we could see a lot more Kyren Williams in the field than we're initially projecting. This is a team that really has already shown many times that they're more than comfortable moving off of Cam Akers, and that makes him really concerning. I do think Cam Akers has a concerning path to becoming a touchdown-dependent low-end running back too, and that's nothing that's ever really exciting. I don't have a problem with its ADP at RB23, but there are several players going around him that I prefer. Guys like David Montgomery, James Conner, Rashad White, James Cook, who are all going after him by ADP right now. I would much rather have than Cam Akers this season. I put Cam Akers in like a really similar mold as Brian Robinson at this point, a guy who, can volume his way to being useful, but he's not going to be the primary pass catcher, and the offense should be mediocre. So I'm just cooling on Cam Akers a little bit. And honestly, with the Cooper Kupp injury news, there is even more possibility that this Rams team just completely blows it up at some point in the season. If that's the case, Cam Akers could be in a world of hurt. So I'm more concerned about Cam Akers than I was earlier. Obviously, things could still work out great for him if he gets all that volume, but I'm just a little bit concerned I don't find myself targeting him the way I was just a couple weeks ago. Another player who's been falling in my rankings lately is Terry McLaurin. The turf toe injury is just really concerning for me. I think that even if he comes back and plays week 1, it could be something that limits his ability to perform at a high level for the first several weeks. And on top of that, he's never finished his career as a top 20 wide receiver, and he now enters this season with an injury and more target competition than he's ever had before. Jahan Dotson is somebody that I really think has a genuine shot to be the alpha on this offense, and he's being drafted as a wide receiver 22 right now, so you're basically drafting him at his ceiling. I would just much rather draft Jahan Dotson at his ADP of wide receiver 35. Dotson's just a much more exciting player for me at this point. He's going way later, and he's not injured either, so I prefer Dotson to McLaurin at this point, and at ADP I definitely do. So I would just sort of look over Terry McLaurin in your drafts right now. I think he's just going a little bit too early. His ADP hasn't really cooled off after the injury, and it really should have dropped by a round or two. So he's not someone I'm targeting anymore. Another player who I've actually talked about really optimistically over the whole course of the offseason is going to be Quentin Johnson, but he is falling in my rankings just a little bit. I have no problem drafting Quentin Johnson where he's being drafted because you're not drafting him to be a starter for you early in the season. You're just trying to draft ceiling. But I do believe, though, that the Los Angeles Chargers genuinely like Joshua Palmer, and he's likely going to be the wide receiver 3 for this team to start the season. That's what we've seen throughout the course of training camp. Joshua Palmer, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams got all the snaps off, while Quentin Johnson played in every single preseason game. And that genuinely opens up the possibility that not only does Quentin Johnson need an injury to be fantasy relevant, he probably needs 2, because if a guy like Keenan Allen goes down, Johnson just becomes the wide receiver 3. You're probably not super excited about Johnson being your starting asset in your fantasy team. So it's just something that's a little bit concerning. Talent could certainly win out here. I do think Quentin Johnson's a more talented player than Joshua Palmer. I would still expect him at some point in the season to pass Palmer on the depth chart, and then you're just that one injury away. But it's just a little bit concerning. I'm a little bit lower on him than I was in the past. Between him and the other 3 rookie wide receivers that went in the first round, those being Zay Flowers, Addison, and JSN, I would have all 3 of those ranked ahead of Quentin Johnson, which is about where they're being drafted as well, but just someone I'm not as excited about anymore. I think that I'm more okay passing up on him for someone else at this point. And the last player who's been notably falling in my rankings lately is going to be George Kittle. George Kittle is just continuing to deal with a groin injury that's holding him out of practice. I was already lower than consensus on George Kittle, but he's now in line to be the number 4 target in what should be a low passing volume offense. I am a little bit concerned that, there's still some question marks surrounding Brock Purdy. He's coming back from an elbow injury that was significant. We don't know exactly how he's going to look once the actual season starts, and George Kittle hasn't exactly been a model of health throughout the course of his career either. He's now a year older than he was last season. He's continuing to be a player that misses time over the course of the season. So I think George Kittle just ends up being a touchdown-dependent tight end, which there are plenty of. And on top of that, he's going in the 5th round of drafts right now. That's just way too high. There are plenty of elite players still available in the 5th round. And on top of that, George Kittle is probably going to miss several games this season. I would much rather draft even TJ Hawkinson in the same range. If you want to take an upside shot, take a guy like Darren Waller there. There are a lot of just much better tight ends. I'd rather have Dallas Goedert by quite a bit. I think David Njoku is even a better asset right now. So there are a lot of tight ends I would much rather have than George Kittle, and George Kittle is going way too high for me. So I don't have George Kittle anywhere. I don't really recommend that you draft him either, but I understand the upside. He'll have a couple really spiked weeks. He'll probably have a couple five catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown games, but for every one he has like that, he'll have 2 catches for 30 yards the next week, and it's just going to be really frustrating to roster him. So I'm passing on George Kittle, and I really would recommend you do that too. So that'll do it for my final risers and fallers video. I hope you guys enjoyed any of the players I talked about here. If there were any players that I didn't talk about that you feel like should be moving up or down in my rankings, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to give you my opinion on those guys. If there's anybody that you disagreed on, let me know in the comments as well. I'm happy to sort of discuss that. If this is your first time on the channel, I want to thank you so much for stopping by. If you want more content like this, which there will be plenty of coming, I'll be rating a bunch of your guys' teams tomorrow. And then we've got NFL football on Thursday. That's super exciting. We'll get into our starts of the week at some point later on this week as well. And then we'll be into our regular season schedule where we'll be doing a waiver wire video, a trade video, and then our starts of the week video where we'll go over start-sit questions as well. So that'll be the schedule for the course of the regular season. So if you want to stick around for all of that, make sure I can be here all season to help you guys win your league. Subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell so you get notifications as more videos come out. If you like this video as well, please do give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Really helps me know that I'm doing a good job and helps me know that you guys want to see more content like this. Up next, like I said, I'll be rating your guys' teams, so some of you guys put in submissions. I'll be trying to get through all of them. I think I can do it, but there are about 20 of them, so I might have to split it into 2 videos, so it's not super long, but been a lot of fun. Really appreciate you guys giving me all the support. It's been super fun growing the channel and making all these videos, and really appreciate everything. So thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you next time.
Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.